Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Describe this conversation. I think I'm going to title this episode, "The Problem with Just Have Faith." And I've got quotations around that phrase, just have faith. It sounds really spiritual, but I'm going to complain about it for a little bit, and we're going to dive deep into that. But here's the context that I've heard this a lot recently. So for those of you that are friends with me on social media, like on Facebook or whatever, maybe you've noticed in recent weeks, I've been doing a lot more consistent posting of a little bit more long form, maybe thoughtful content beyond just the normal cat videos that I share, but I've been putting out a lot of content that's kind of directly related to our content, Les, EntrePastors, the work that we're doing here and the ways we're trying to help and serve pastors. And I usually share that in several places. I'll put it out on my public, like personal feed. I'll usually do it inside of our free EntrePastors Facebook group. By the way, if you're not a part of EntrePastors Connect, come on into the community there. We'd love to have you on Facebook. But then I also am in a few other groups of pastors, and there's one that I'll usually just go share it in as well. So I kind of spread out that post over some different places on Facebook, on social media. And I get a lot of engagement, and just depending on the topic, a lot of engagement will come from that. And recently, I've been talking about some content you and I've created in the past here at EntrePastors, where we've highlighted some of the unintended consequences, maybe negative side effects of the model of a full-time pastor. And we're not saying that there's anything inherently wrong if you're serving in that capacity.
Yeah.
We've just pointed out some of the problems that come from that. So
right.
As I'm talking about some of those themes, as I'm sharing some of that on social media, this phrase keeps popping up again and again in different ways from different voices. And it's this idea that when it comes to income for a pastor, they should just have faith. As a matter of fact, someone went so far, I'm going to create a whole post around this. In one of my posts, somebody commented by saying something to the effect of, if a church gives you anything, just accept it. And the context of that post was, if you're getting paid anything, you work as a full-time pastor and you just accept what you're given, regardless of what that number is. And I, politely but firmly responded to that pastor going, I disagree with that completely. Like that's creates this environment for pastors to be taken advantage of financially and for their families to suffer, to just accept it. Or again, back to our original statement, to just have faith and to sit back idly by and just go, well, if God wants me to have more money, he'll just provide more money, when clearly there's some things we could do to drill down into that. So I just want to talk about some of the, frustrations that come up in my mind when I hear that phrase.
Yeah.
Just have faith. I'll take a breath and let
Absolutely.
you jump in. But what's going on?
I've got one thought. Okay. Here's my thought. And so first of all, I don't believe most people believe what you just said, even those that say they do. I don't believe they do, because you don't, and I'll embellish on that in a second, but when you believe something, you act accordingly. Believe is not about what you say. It's about what you do. And so I believe most people's lifestyle is inconsistent with that statement, even if they say it. I'll give you some examples in a second. Before I do, if you've said that, just have faith, or if you've posted on, if you've gone on Jon's, page or profile or whatever, and criticized him or us or EntrePastors because you guys aren't having faith, you just have faith in God to give, to provide, and all that kind of business. I do believe we need to have faith in God to provide. But if you've said that, or you think that you believe that, then I want you just to pause for a second. If you're out walking, please stop looking at the birds or the trees, watch traffic, but I want you to listen very closely for just a second. If you're driving along and listening, lean in for just a minute, okay? Just lean down, get your ear a little bit close to the speaker. I'm not going to scream at you, but I
need to have my cuss button ready.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. Okay, everybody, if you have said that, and you think you believe it, I want you just to lean in. I want you to listen very carefully. I want to tell you as kindly and as tactfully as I know how to tell you this. Are you ready? You're an idiot. Okay.
Love it.
You're a
Go,
moron.
Les. Les is the most fired up I've ever
Because,
seen you. Keep
okay,
going.
because if now here's the thing. I'm going to take that back. If you never go to a doctor, okay, if you don't work at a job where you receive payment, okay, if you don't, then you're being consistent. If you never, if you're a pastor, if you're serving a church or a nonprofit, if you never do any kind of fundraising, if you never preach on giving or good stewardship, you never encourage your people to give toward a cause or a need that you have, you've never had a church yard sale or fundraiser of any kind. If you don't do any of those things, then you have every right to say that you believe, hey, just sit back, let God provide. Because all of those things that I mentioned are you being proactive to get some resources somewhere into your bank account or the church's bank account or whatever. Otherwise, and when there are people who believe, John, that you're not showing faith when you go to a doctor. You just pray hard, you sit back and expect God to heal you. And if he chooses not to heal you, it's not his will for you to be healed. Mm-hmm. So I don't believe personally there's one thing wrong with praying and trusting God, but also having the common sense or uncommon sense to take some medication as well. James talked about when somebody is sick, you pray, call your elders together and pray, but also anoint with oil. Now, was he not showing faith?
Yeah.
By not just praying alone and trusting God? Well, those two things are not mutually exclusive. You can anoint with oil and pray. In fact, that's what he said to do. So those two things aren't mutually exclusive at all. In fact, I believe they go hand in hand. I think you could make a case that because you believe God is going to provide, you're going to go out and do some work or make some calls or ask around, believing that God's going to be the one that provides the work. I've got a really good friend that's a Christian artist, and he's got a band, and he's really successful at it. But he never does any advertising or anything like that. But he talks to people about gigs and inviting them to come and do things. He just doesn't pay for a bunch of marketing and advertising and all that. If people do that, that's fine. But he just says that God is his agent. That's his, and he says he's a cheap agent because most agents charge 15% or more, and God just asks for 10.
Yeah.
Those are his words, not mine, by the way. But that's just how he kind of explains that.
Yeah.
So I don't, obviously, I'm not completely objective about this, just as you're not, John. I don't think anybody probably is, but I do know what the scripture says about faith and works, and so I see no inconsistency at all. In fact, I think it's possible to use just have faith as a rationalization of not doing some work or not being creative or some of the things that it takes to really be successful in the ways that we talk about it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm still stuck a few bars back in the conversation where I think I've got a new title to the show. It's "You're an Idiot," and then I'm going to.
I like it.
Done that. That's good. It's got a ring to it. So
my wife, right now, my wife is listening to this podcast and saying Leslie, by the way.
Well, hey, Paige, don't tone him down, man. Don't throttle him back on this one. I'm going to quote him. That's going to be a direct quote to some of these folks on social media. I'm just going to say, man, "You're an idiot," and then put -Les Hughes on there.
Quote. Yeah.
You'd be watching for that. But no, guys, here's the thing. One of my issues with the just have faith is it sounds really spiritual. And so in these groups of pastors on Facebook or whatever, you really sound like you're up on your spiritual high horse when you give that advice about, man, just don't worry about money. Just have faith. And I think I've got several big issues with it, but one of my big problems with it is it just exacerbates that climate, whatever that is that we've kind of inherited / created in this, modern church culture where we're all okay with pastors who are struggling financially. Nobody's really concern that we've got pastors who just barely are making it, whose families are going without needlessly. I've come to the absolute decision and conviction that they're needlessly suffering financially because there's things we could do beyond just sitting back and accepting what we've defined as okay, and then put the spiritual label on it of just have faith. Here's another thing I want to address. It's kind of another rabbit trail off of this conversation. One of the posts that I got back, one of the comments, was actually from a friend of mine, someone I respect deeply in ministry and just in friendship. But they were kind of coming at it from a standpoint of, rather than being an EntrePastor and rather than going out in the marketplace and leaning into your pastoral or your entrepreneurial skills, they were kind of implying a pastor should go the other way and really lean into the full-time thing and just ignore the fact that you're getting paid peanuts and pour all of your life, soul, energy into church. And then essentially, and I'm very much reading between the lines, but I know this guy very well and I know his story. And what I would say, Les, is that in his particular story, he's got an exceptional story going in terms of the church world and the pastor world. And right now he is sitting on the mountaintop of what we have kind of held up, or what has been modeled for us as the Cadillac standard, the metrics that we should all be striving for in the church. And that is big buildings, big budgets, lots of people coming. And he's worked hard to get there. He has he hasn't just sat back with just have faith. He's put work into that. But here's a little bit of my problem with that implication of, man, if you just have faith and have a big vision for what God can do. I have been, and I bet this is going to land with so many pastors, I have been in that role as a pastor where you are believing God for big things. You're taking steps of action and faith. And then what happens when God doesn't come through in the ways that you're believing him for? And often it's around those metrics of bigger budgets, bigger buildings, more people attending. And we believe God for these things. We do the things that we're told will create those environments that people will, fall into, come and be a part of all of that thing. And in some stories, it works. What happens when you're just having faith and then seemingly God doesn't come through? Now, again, I don't really believe at the end of the day that God has failed me or any pastor.
That's exactly right.
But that all sounds good theologically, but then where do I transfer that feeling of failure? Well, I guess then I'll own it then. I have failed. Apparently I didn't have enough faith. Apparently I did something. Yeah, go ahead.
Or possibly the outcomes were different than what we expected. There was there's so many biblical precedents and places to go. Like the friend that you mentioned, he didn't just sit, but you said it yourself. He's worked hard.
Yeah.
So don't imply that God does not do arbitrary, Jon. He doesn't. Now, you and I may not always understand the reasons and the rationales that he does what he does, but Isaiah said his thoughts are higher than our thoughts and his ways higher than our ways. But he doesn't do arbitrary. It's not random from God's perspective. Not at all. There's a very specific intention behind it, even if we don't realize it. So, Abraham was the epitome of the faithful man in the Old Testament. He's the father of our faith. But when God told him to trust him, to believe, God said, start walking. And he started walking. He didn't just sit there and expect God to supernaturally transport him to Canaan. He could have. God could have done that, but he just chose not to. Abraham literally put feet to his faith. When the Israelites, when Joshua was leading them across the Jordan River, when it was at flood stage, by the way, God didn't move and did not part that water until the priests stepped in. They could have waited and folded their arms and waited for the water to part. Hey, just have faith. Yeah. Just have faith. They'd still be waiting.
Yeah.
They'd still be waiting if they would have done that. And there are many more places. Jesus healing a blind man, but he had to go and wash the spittle off of his and mud off of his eyes first. Naaman in the Old Testament, when Elisha says, go and dip in the Jordan River to have your leprosy clean. And he did, or he would have died of leprosy. So there are
Yeah.
just so many examples of complete trust and complete faith in the Lord, but also some actions on our part. So one of the things that God blesses is faithful action.
Yeah, that's good. And I think that's the thing. One of the solutions, if we're solving any problems here, is that it's not this, again, this flawed dichotomy of either or. Either you have faith in God or you go try and figure it all out on your own, as in going out into the marketplace and establishing another stream of revenue for your family. It could be both. It could be both. And I do have faith in God. I am trusting Him, and I'm also doing the things that depend upon me that I'm capable of doing with God's
Mhm.
help by His power, and He's providing through those opportunities as well. It's both and, it's not either or. Something too, Les, as I'm hearing you talk, and I just maybe want to make sure we get this out there. Another takeaway, another lesson, and that would be that the stories of our lives from one person to another are different, and that's okay, and that's by God's design. And so we need to be careful. We also, I'm including you and me and EntrePastors, our platform, into that as well. We need to be careful not to get into this prescriptive mode where we say, hey, because this worked for me, this ought to be everybody's path. Everybody
Mhm.
should be doing it this way. Because certainly we could do that. I probably have done that. If you listen to my content, or my tone, much of the time, it's like, hey, I'm leading in this direction. Everybody do what I'm saying to do. It can be applied the other direction. Like this friend of mine that I'm referencing, his story, that's worked really well for him. And praise God for his story. But maybe that's not prescriptive of everybody. Maybe it's quite okay for some pastors to, instead of leaning hard into that full time, I'm just getting one source of income from this church that I've given my entire life to, win or lose. For some pastors to say, you know what, I'm doing both, and yes, I'm going to continue to pastor and shepherd this church and preach, but I'm going to go out in the marketplace and create some revenue beyond what my church is either able or willing to pay. And that's okay as well. And I think a lot of times in the Christian faith, certainly as pastors, we can fall into that trap of like making my experience authoritative for your life as well. So maybe just a caution for all in the arena in regards.
Mm. Yeah, talking about trust, if we can trust rather than only trust him in the context of the four walls of the church, kind of, if you build it, they will come. Trust in him as we go. Matthew 28, it's as you go, make disciples, and as you go, expect the Lord to bring people by your path who need to follow him.
Yeah.
Not only those who come within the walls of the church. And they're, again, doing one doesn't preclude you from doing the other. They're
Yeah.
both needed, and God would bless both of those things.
Yeah. Well, Les, thanks for letting me kind of process some of this and get this off my chest. The other day when I reached out to you with this, I was like, man, I'm just annoyed by that mantra, that cliche of, man, just have faith. So hopefully we've maybe touched and encouraged a few pastors out there who are tempted to feel, spiritually less than others who seemingly just have the faith to sit back and wait for God to provide while they are out. Am I doing something wrong by being out trying to establish some more income for my family? And it's both, and it's, yes, trust in God and also take the action that you're capable of taking. So this has been very therapeutic for me. Anything else you want to add to this conversation, Les?
Something that you said earlier about your friend is that, I think you were implying that he could do those same things in a different context or as a different person and maybe not get the same results. I would
Exactly.
say that I had a mentor years ago tell me there was a decision, a choice that I was making, and felt like the Lord was leading me in a certain direction at one point in time. And a similar, in fact, might have been even the same opportunity came a while later. His basically what he said was, just because something was the Lord's will um, at one point in time in your life doesn't mean that it is the next.
Yeah.
And even if if you look at the Hebrew people as they went into the promised land and conquered Jericho and all of that, they were when they were going to go up into Canaan the first time, and they didn't go because of their lack of faith. Then they were afraid of the Lord because here comes his discipline because they've been disobedient. They said, "Oh, never mind. We've changed. We'll go now. We'll go.
Yeah.
And God said, "Don't do it."
Yeah.
just because it was his plan the first time around doesn't mean it always is in every occasion. So,
Well, and another example too would be like Moses and, water from the rock. God, the first time said either strike the rock, and the next time he's supposed to speak to it, if I'm remembering that correctly. And he struck the rock again.
Yep.
And so again, like God was going to provide the same result, but differently, like just illustrating your point that the way God chooses to do something in one context is not always going to be the exact same way. And that's, again, just a really good lesson for us to be walking out our story before the Lord and not trying to prescribe our story to someone else or to live someone else's story. And I think, again, it's so easy to fall into that trap in the Christian world and as pastors to look at other pastors. Oh man, he said, if I just had faith, that I could have all that too. Well, I did have faith, and his story is different than my story, and that's, I don't want that to sound like victim mentality or sound like whining. I want to be able to celebrate people who are doing well, and I also want to empower others to say, if you're on that traditional path and just having faith isn't cutting it for you, then let's lean into the works side of that equation and go do some work, and change the story, change the outcome a little bit, and do both at the same time.
And then your trust comes in when you trust a loving father to correct you this is assuming that your motives are in the right place. You're doing it for the right reasons. Sure. You just make a decision that's inconsistent with the best way. Then let's trust him to show us and not be playing games, not wanting to be cruel because he's not. But let's, just like you would show a child that was making a mistake, even if their heart was in the right place, you would gently try to nudge them and teach them and help them make the right decision. Let's trust our Heavenly Father to do the same, at least the same.
That's a good word. And I'll share this. I don't know if I've ever shared this on this podcast or not, but years ago, I heard a sermon that really stuck with me, kind of the main punchline of it. I think the sermon title was something to the effect of God's will is whatever. And it was, the text was 1 Corinthians, the passage that talks about, therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatsoever you do, do it all for the glory of God. And the point was basically, sometimes we get so wrapped up in worrying about, are we walking in the will of God, when what we really need to be focused on is, are we walking in the ways of God, Les? Because to your point, if I'm walking in the ways of God, he will ensure that I'm walking in the will of God. It's the law of physics, right? That says it's easier to direct an object that's in motion. And so this gets back to that idea of action. Like, rather than just sitting down in the road and saying, God, when you're ready to show up, I'm here. Take action. And if your heart's in the right place and you have a heart to follow after God, if you do happen to step out of line truly of his will, he is going to be a good and faithful father to bring you back on course. And also, much of the time, I do believe what that sermon, kind of the punchline of that, a lot of the times God's will is whatever. Like, you want to do this? Okay, whatever. That's just honor me as you do. Oh, you want to do that? Okay, whatever. I do believe there's times God interrupts our life with specific assignments, and he'll make that very clearly known to us. And then I think there's a lot of times that we have freedom in the eyes of our Father to. Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there God bless everybody. See you soon.